Friday. It's a beautiful Friday, and it is 10 o'clock. It's time for 10 with Tim. Just kind of excited about the fact that the CDC has lifted the mask mandate and the distancing obligations for vaccinated people, and our Kentucky governor has followed suit. That's fantastic. Since we started 10 with Tim, sort of with the pandemic, we started when all of the social distancing and shutdown began. It's just kind of something we should celebrate together. Just because they end all of that doesn't mean we end 10 with Tim. We're going to keep right on rolling. But anyway, I'm excited for what is the passing of the threat of the pandemic, and also really blessed by our time in the Word. So something good came out of COVID, perhaps, if nothing else, the fact that you and I are deeper in the Word now than we were a year ago. So let's jump in. 2 Samuel chapter 10, verses 1 to 19 is where we are. Listen, enjoy chapter 10 because in a lot of ways, things change in a dramatic and drastic way in the story when we pick up Monday in chapter 11. But let's talk about chapter 10. First off, it sits here in a very important place. It sort of ties together, obviously, chapter 9 and chapter 11, but it really sort of resets the table in some ways that I want you to notice for what comes forward. First off, I want you to pay attention to how chapter 9 begins and how chapter 10 begins, because whether you realize it or not, there's some parallelism here. Notice how it started yesterday. We were talking about the story with Mephibosheth, and David says, is there anybody in Saul's family still alive? Anybody that I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake? Those words, I want to show kindness. It's literally the very same words in chapter 10, verse 2, where David says, I'm going to show kindness. I'm going to show loyalty to Hanun, just as his father Nahash was always loyal to me. So in both of these stories, the way it begins is David's initiative or David's aim to show loyalty or to show kindness to someone for the sake of someone else. Do you see that? So we are sort of establishing, or one more time emphasizing, highlighting David's character as a very loyal man, an oath keeper, a promise keeper, a man who shows kindness, inside his kingdom, inside his nation, as he did with Mephibosheth. And now in chapter 10, David is a man who shows the same kindness, the same loyalty to those outside his kingdom. Now, politically speaking, we're talking about sort of a treaty relationship that David and Israel had with King Nahash and Ammon of the Ammonites. But now King Nahash has died. That's the father. And so David now wants to sort of renew the treaty or indicate to his heir, who is Hanun, that he intends to continue this same peaceful, loyal relationship, the same one that he had with his father. This would be typical in ancient Middle Eastern sort of politics, that you would want to reestablish or renew or affirm the treaty that you had previously with the heir. So that's what David is doing. It's showing loyalty, it's showing kindness, it's honoring his word, keeping oath, all of these things. So what David does, he just simply sends some ambassadors, some goodwill ambassadors, and they're going to the funeral. You know, they're going to express sympathy for the death of King Nahash. You send them to the son who is Hanun, right? Okay, so far so good. But what happens? Well, what happens is King Hanun, the son, sort of led astray by bad advisors, but you can understand their suspicion, I suppose. They just simply misinterpret David's gesture here to show loyalty and kindness and sympathy. They don't buy it. Now, I guess in some ways, if I try to see it from their perspective, back when, King Nahash had the treaty with David, David was a nobody. As a matter of fact, the treaty could have been with Saul, with Israel in days gone by when Israel wasn't any kind of threat. But now David is a very powerful king, and Israel is a very powerful nation. And so, having a treaty with somebody who can't be a threat is one thing, but having a treaty with a country that, really could attack you is different. And so now, King Hanan is sort of led astray and led to be suspicious of David here. What if these aren't ambassadors at all? What if they're spies? And what if they're planning an attack? And so what they do, I'm sorry, it strikes me as funny. It ain't funny. It's really not funny, but they shave the beards of the ambassadors, not the whole beard, but just a half of the beard. So they shave half of their beards, and then they cut their robes off, at the belly button, at the buttocks, my New Living Translation says. But understand, what they have done is abject humiliation for these ancient, Oriental men. First off, it was considered an act of violence even to touch the beard of an ancient Oriental man. So doing anything with the beard is considered an act of brutal violence, but also humiliation, real humiliation to shave off half of their beard. And the other part, I don't think I need to explain. We're a fairly modest, no, we're not. We're not a modest culture at all. I mean, ever since Baywatch, we are not a modest culture. So it's hard for us to even imagine the prudish modesty of the ancient Oriental culture here. But to cut off the robes in a way which are going to display, the back and the front. I mean, their whole business is now exposed. Their manhood is exposed. And this is complete humiliation. Now, you've got to realize in the ancient world, in the ancient world, really until fairly modern times, people didn't have a lot of clothes. And in biblical days, an adult person might have a single robe that would do them for their entire adult life. That there just weren't closets full of clothing at all. And especially for these ambassadors on the road. They did not have a suitcase with a change of clothes. So they got to wear this all the way home, which means, their business is flapping in the breeze all the way home. You can't just swing by Target and buy a pair of jeans, right? And so the humiliation is nearly total. Now, I love David, and honestly, chapter 10 is your last opportunity to completely love David. But I love David in chapter 5 because when he finds out the way his ambassadors are humiliated, he has a lot of actual, just real compassion. And he responds in a very human way, in a very generous way to these men because he recognizes their humiliation. So he gives them permission just to stay in Jericho. You don't have to come back home and face your family until your beard grows back. It's just kind of an amazing detail, but it just shows David is this man of tremendous compassion for now. And again, that's part of what chapter 10 sets up. Again, this misunderstanding, this foolish, provocation of David, because again, Nahash doesn't have to do this, but he misunderstands it. And notice that you end up with a war with three nations because of this stupidity. It's a misunderstanding. David meant it as a kind gesture. They misinterpret it as some sort of suspicious, antagonistic gesture. And you end up with a war between three nations, which is really kind of stunning. And I could stop. I don't have time. I got 1 more minute left. But I think about the war in your family, and if we trace it back, lots of times, giant misunderstandings, giant arguments go back to something so silly, a misunderstanding, something misinterpreted. Oh my goodness. And honestly, in human history, giant wars have been started by ignorance like this. But anyway, let me go on quickly to set the stage for Monday. Notice that first off, Joab is actually, we don't always love Joab, but in this story, Joab's pretty fantastic. He gives this amazing, call to arms and call to courage, and Joab is awesome. It becomes a three-way war between Israel, the Ammonites, and the Arameans, right? And so the Arameans aren't really in it, but they're paid to join in as allies of the Ammonites. But as you notice, Joab sets the Arameans on the run. Then then David takes the battlefield, which is really pretty amazing. And pay attention to that. Verse 17, David takes the battlefield. They completely defeat the Arameans. They're gone. But now if you notice where we leave off in chapter 10, verse 19, there's going to be this lingering now war with the Ammonites. That's going to continue. The Arameans are defeated, but we still got a war with the Ammonites. And that's what leads us into chapter 11. Monday morning, 10 o'clock, we're going to start chapter 11, verses 1 to 13, so read ahead. I'm making this dramatic because it is. Chapter 11 is where David sees Bathsheba. He's not on the battlefield anymore because David is now a different kind of man, a different kind of king. You're not going to see David again as you saw him in chapter 10, a man of utter character and an utter devotion and honesty and integrity, a man who leads his army into battle, fighting for his people. Say goodbye to this David because everything's going to change in chapter 11. I think you know the story. I feel almost guilty because it gets so good. I mean, if it were a novel, what from chapter 11 on, man, is just so good, but it's also just so devastating. The fall of a man as good as David, and we're about to see it in real time. And again, as I say, it's utterly devastating because you realize if David can sin in this way, so can I, so can you. So read ahead. Monday morning, chapter 11, verses 1 to 13, Bathsheba comes onto the scene, and this story changes forever. The way we remember David. So anyway, have a happy weekend. I love you guys. It's going to be beautiful. Sunday morning in the pulpit, I'll be preaching again on the 8th commandment. We're doing the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not steal. It's going to be a sermon that you probably aren't expecting to see because you're thinking, hey, I don't steal. I haven't stolen anything at all. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the way you and I, in everyday ways, rationalize the fact that we can be thieves. We'll pick that up on Sunday morning in the pulpit. If I don't see you on Sunday, I will see you Monday morning.